guess a little bit of a comment and suggestion. It seems like there are a number of dump days, which are great and important, and I know folks really depend on those. I am wondering if it would be possible in coming years just to make this funding go farther for the types of projects that folks are trying to do. If we looked at setting aside some specific funds for dump days in particular in the budget, because people always ask for them, and I think we could potentially distribute them also kind of with more geographic equity if we weren't just depending on neighborhood organizations and actually just as a city, okay, we have some dump days that we sponsor and support and make sure that the whole city.
Councilmember Coombs, I had a really hard time hearing your first piece of that. Can you just say what the request was one more time?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I am using my council laptop, and for some reason it does not. I have to like shout into it.
That's much better
for folks to hear me. So sorry about that. Just that there's a number of dump days on the list, which are important, and I know people need them. But I wonder if we could make the funding for these kind of community improvement projects go further if council actually just set aside funds specifically for dump days and work to make sure that there were some kind of covering the whole city.
Got it. Thank you. And I know we've talked about that in the past related to some of the waste hauling efforts and things like that, that large item and bulky could be included in that. Okay, thank you.
I had a similar thought to Councilmember Coombs. Just seeing that, I know that that used to be, you know, something that we invested in more regularly, and then we went to like a voucher system. I'm not sure how successful that was, but I don't think I realized that the trash hauling would be now like an eligible type of project for the neighborhood beautification or improvement rather grants. So I support that direction. Any other thoughts, questions? All right. Well, thank you, Scott, for your presentation.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. We are on the flexible fund update for homelessness services.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Emily. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm one of on the homeless programs teams. And I just wanted to give a little update on our Flex Fund and just kind of what we've seen so far this year in comparison to last year. Andrew, you can go ahead to the next slide. So what is the Flex Fund? The purpose is to remove financial barriers that households face to maintain or secure permanent housing in a high cost, low vacancy rental market, and then supporting households that do not fit the qualifying criteria for other funding streams. And this assists with our community's goal of engaging in homelessness prevention and making homelessness brief, rare, and non-recurring. The funding comes from 2% of recreational marijuana tax revenue. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So how to apply for it. We ask that everyone works with a case manager who has completed our training. That way they have a higher chance of being approved the first go round. I host trainings at least once a month. I typically do it on the first Monday, but if there's a group of people that want it done a different day or time, that's possible as well. The application opens on the second Monday of every month. So for July, that'll be this next Monday, the 10th. And we typically run out of funding in about 24 hours. This is a pretty high demand fund, and a lot of agencies rely on it to support their clients. And it used to be a little bit more practical, but now it's really just kind of like almost a little bit of a race to get an application in and get it approved. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So looking so far what we've seen up until this point for 2023, we have spent about $250,000, and we've had a little bit closer to 278 and some requested. So that means about 113 applications were approved out of a total of 166 being submitted. Typically, we see applications denied based on an applicant not living in the city of Aurora, the application not being complete or turned in correctly, or because we've run out of funding. Typically, we're not seeing a whole lot of folks applying when they don't meet those, meet our requirements, which are essentially that they live in the city and that they have some form of income that will support them following our assistance. Go ahead to the next slide, please. And so just looking back at what we saw in the calendar year of 2022, a total of 466 applications were turned in, with 321 being approved. So there was about 878,000 requested, and we spent just over or just under 600,000. Next slide, please. So for 2023, what we've seen so far for the applications, what they're applying for is security deposit in first month, about 70 applications, rental arrears on a current unit, 56, relocation or a family reunification, 15 applications, rental arrears on a past unit, 10 applications, utility assistance 5, one-time move-in cost, so typically that's like a holding fee or an application fee, something of that nature. We've seen 3, 2 hotel or motel stays, and then applications fee again for 2 of those applications. You can apply for more than one category. That's why the numbers don't quite add up to what my last slide said. A lot of times we'll see, you know, the security deposit and an application fee within one, or you know, a couple other combination. I just like to point out that for the hotel and motel stays, we only offer that if somebody has a lease. So if somebody had, you know, a lease starting next week, but they didn't really have anywhere to stay in between, we would support a hotel or a motel stay for that period. But without that permanent unit coming up, then we don't have funding for any emergency hotel or motels. The next category, or next slide, please. So we have a ton of agencies trained. This is our list. There are definitely more. And I would say within all these agencies, we have about close to 200 case managers that are trained. So a ton of folks. Like I said, it's a pretty high demand fund. We are pretty unique in being a city that offers this. I haven't found other counties or cities that offer a similar fund the way that we do. So you can see tons of people here. We've got the hospitals, Aurora Mental Health, VA, school districts, tons of organizations. Next slide, please. So most frequently, we are getting applications from Aurora Housing Authority, Mile High Behavioral Healthcare, Aurora Mental Health and Recovery, the Salvation Army, and AD Works. So pretty much all of our funding is spread among these 3 organizations. Next slide, please. Some other data points that I just wanted to highlight. So far this year, we've had 81 applications that were single parents. So that is, you know, a little bit more than half. And 37 of these applicants this year were experiencing literal homelessness. So we were able to house 37 people experiencing homelessness. So I think that is a pretty big win. Most of our funding right now is going towards eviction prevention, which is equally as important, but it's nice to see that we are, you know, helping some people get off of the streets. Next slide, please. So going in a little bit deeper to our monthly spending, like I said, our fund opens the second Monday of every month, and the funding runs out typically in the first 24 hours. We get about $40,000 per month to spend. So each application has a maximum of $4,000 that they can apply for. Not every application applies for that much. It's just based on how much they need. And again, funds are in high demand, and many agencies really rely on this. Like I said, we're kind of one of the only places that offers this type of funding, so runs out super quick. Next slide, please. So some of the other funding that is available in this general area for similar stuff is Arapahoe County has a funding for eviction prevention and rehousing. But unfortunately, residents of the city of Aurora are not able to access that funding. So It's a little bit more for some of those more rural counties or rural parts of the county and into Denver. Metro Denver Homeless Initiative also has a fund that's pretty identical to ours, and they approve applications for the entire metro area. So Adams County, Denver, Littleton, all over the place. They have a little bit less money than we do, and they only accept one application per agency a month, to my understanding. Don't quote me on that. It could have changed since the last time I looked into it. Next slide, please. So community solutions funding, we were just awarded $30,000 for flex funding for veterans specifically experiencing homelessness in the city of Aurora. The funding cannot duplicate services from the VA or any of the SSVF services. So right now we're looking at it being used more for car repairments, landlord incentives, and other barriers to housing that the VA or any of the other agencies serving veterans don't cover. We're still finalizing some of the details, so we haven't been able to use any of this money yet, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks we will be able to. And hopefully that will just help some of our veteran population a little bit further. Next slide, please. Okay, well, thank you guys for letting me speak. Are there any questions or comments?
None for me. Councilmember Coombs?
No, I think Coombs is frozen.
Oh,
Okay, what about you, Councilmember Marcano? Will we get her?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Murillo, and thank you, Emily, for that overview. I am curious, the agencies that we have trained to help people navigate this process. I didn't see the Colorado Economic Defense Project, and I know that they are kind of handling the state's the state's ERAP program, and I think the city and county of Denver's as well. Is that an agency that we get referrals from or that we've contacted in the past?
not to my knowledge. Emma, correct me if you've been in contact with them, but we would definitely offer the training to them if somebody was interested. So we could definitely do that.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I ask is I got contacted by one of my constituents that her daughter's best friend's family is about to face homelessness, and they've already been facing that instability. I sent a council request y'all's way yesterday, but I also referred them to CEDP. I was hoping that y'all were already in contact with them. So yeah, I guess I would just put that on your radar. Maybe that's another agency that we can work with as well. But yeah, and I guess just as a general comment, like $40,000 a month and we blow through that in 24 hours. I mean, that just goes to show that their need is really, really great. And, you know, I think there needs to be more that we do to ensure folks aren't falling into homelessness. So I want to thank you all for the work you do. And hopefully we can get you some more resources.
Yeah. Thank you, council members. And I'll definitely reach out to those folks.
Or Councilmember Marcano, if you have any contacts at that agency, if you could share that. If not, we'll just reach out to them on our own.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and send you a couple contacts.
Great, thank you. And I believe we're going to be having this at study session for the rest of council to hear this presentation as well. Is that correct, Jessica?
That was something we wanted to ask if you all, we had interest in this from the mayor and other council members, and I mentioned this was coming to Horns first. So I guess the request from your colleagues through me is that we would take it to study session for informational purposes as well.
Sure.
That's fine. Councilmember Coombs, are you okay with that? Or do you have any questions? Maybe she's still having tech issues.
Let me shoot her a text real quick.
Okay. So it sounds like there's enough support at this point to move that forward if we need to. When Councilmember Coombs is back on, we'd love to hear from her. Maybe she can post in the chat.
Yeah, she said she's having bandwidth issues in the chat. That's weird. She's at City Hall, I think. Jessica, and is everything okay on y'all's end? Okay.
It is.
This might be our wonderful laptops.
Okay, she does support moving this to a study session.
Yeah, sorry, y'all. My computer decided to update, so I was trying to use my phone and it was doing weird things, but I do support.
All right. Sounds good. Let's move on to our last item, which is a update, Proposition 123 update. And who's going to be the presenter for this item?
Councilmember Murillo, my name is Jeff Hancock. I'm the financial supervisor with Community Development. And I, myself and Sarah Carroll, one of my colleagues, will be going through this presentation. I think Jessica had a few comments at the start.
Sure. So, as council members recall, council passed a resolution, I believe in January of 2023, related to Prop 123 and supporting it. At that point, we didn't have details from the state related to how a city would sign on or commit to the funding. Some preliminary information came out in mid-February related to creating a baseline, which is how this proposition, the language is laid out for measurement of success. Subsequently, additional information came out from the state in the spring. We've had a couple technical assistance meetings with the state, a couple of asks of the state. There was legislation that was drafted to clarify how Prop 123 would be implemented. That legislation did not pass. Some of the things in that legislation were related again to baseline. This is the number of units essentially that you're agreeing that you have in your community currently that are affordable, and then how many would be affordable after. Some of the things within that legislation were to clarify what defines those types of units. And so essentially the issue here is it's not an apples to oranges comparison. You have undeed restricted units on the front end. This is looking just at general affordability using census information, the American Community Survey. On the back end, you're required to have deed restricted units. And so for Aurora, a large community is still a larger proportion of naturally occurring affordable housing than some other communities in the metro area. And so our number is very high on the front end, but we're only able to count deed restricted on the back end. So part of the conversations we had with the state were about if we could do the number of deed restricted on the front end and compare to how many we create over 3 years. The state has not been favorable to that. We wrote a letter along with some other cities, Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, about a month ago, just really highlighting this again to the state that the legislation hadn't passed. And we received a letter back saying, we're going with what we have for now. We can't change anything at this point without legislation. So at this point, we are, receiving interest from developers to get going on this. There's all different types of funds, as Jeff will just kind of provide a brief overview of for developers developing products at different income levels. And so, at this point, I think the strategy is probably to sign on and commit to start unlocking the funding for both the city to distribute and also the funding that's going directly to developers. This funding is split up between OEDIT and CHAFA and then Department of Housing. And then we continue to work with some of the working groups that we're working with regionally on legislation for next year to make sure that the calculations really make more sense. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff and Sarah to talk a little bit more specifically about the numbers. Again, this would be one to take to the full council for an update. We also are intending to put in the commitment, which essentially is an online sort of application and form It doesn't require a resolution from council or anything like that. So I will let Jeff take it from there.
Thank you, Jessica. Andrew, can you go to the next slide, please? And we wanted to just give a quick summary. I know council is familiar with some of the background of Proposition 123, but again, it was passed last year in 2022. The affordable housing pot of money is funded by 0.1% of annual state income tax revenue, and that amount of money is about roughly $145,000 this year for the first 6 months of 2023, and then roughly double that of about $291,000 in 2024. And as Jessica mentioned, that money is divided up between the state's Department of Local Affairs and the Office of Economic Development and International Trade to distribute to communities throughout the state who have opted in to Proposition 123. As we'll get into on the next slide, one of the things we have to do is create a baseline number of existing affordable housing units in Aurora. And that's, as Jessica mentioned, that's part of the issue that we're working on right now. In our world, we've always kind of defined affordable housing units as deed restricted units, where there's a restriction on income levels that can occupy those units. The state, through the legislation, has referred to the affordable units as naturally occurring affordable units as a percentage of a household AMI, or area median income. And so we're at the point now where we are working to come up with our baseline number that we will bring back to council. We're targeting a study session on July 24th to provide that update on what number we landed on. And then we also have to agree to increase that number by 3% per year over the next 3 years in order to opt into the funding from Proposition 123. As Jessica mentioned, the process of opting into the state, it's an electronic submission. So we have to come up with our baseline number. We have to explain the data sources used to come up with that number, and the state has to agree that those data sources are agreeable to them. And then we have to describe what areas will be prioritized with potential future funding, such as high density housing, mixed income housing, environmental sustainability, and what the state calls deconcentration of affordable housing. And then on top of that, we just need approval from an authorized individual at the City of Aurora, which will be our city manager, and we can submit that opt-in online to the state. And our target is to submit that by the end of July. We would like to do it. Assuming we bring this forward to study session on July 24th, and there's no issues or holdups at that point. Sarah Carroll, who is also with Community Development, is going to talk a little bit about our existing population of deed restricted units and the cost to build affordable housing, and what that cost might be to create a promised number of units through Prop 123 going forward. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Andrew, can you flip through the slides, please? Thank you. Okay. So currently we have approximately 5,000 deed restricted housing units on the ground. And from 2020 to 2023, we currently have 2,102 units in our pipeline to be created. As you're probably aware, David Paul Rosen and Associates is doing an in-depth market study on putting additional units on the ground and what that cost will be. So what you see in front of you are preliminary calculations of gap financing that we would need to create affordable housing. So the City of Aurora currently provides about $15,000 per unit to create 1 unit of affordable housing. The state has given us a current count of 34,401 units of affordable housing in our count. So in order for us to create the 1,032 units per year, which is now over 3,000 units for the next 3 years, in order to create those units, we would need between our $15,000 gap and the average gap suggested by David Paul Rosen and Associates, which is $152,620.75, we would need an additional $137,620.75 per unit to create those 1,032 units, which is equivalent of $142 million. That is a lot of money, and that isn't even what we could get from the state for Proposition 123. We recently heard a new number of the fact that we have 56,000 units in our inventory. And again, applying that average per unit of $137,620, we would have to increase our inventory by 1,680 units per year, which would be $202,860 per year to create that inventory on an annual basis. So if we were only to do 4-story apartment surface parking at 200 units per year, we would need $185,429 per unit, and that would increase 6 units per year at $1,112,574. But you would still have to increase that by 1,032. So you can do the math on each of these line items depending on what we want to build. And so I broke it down. I gave you all of the different line items and all of the different gaps, but I went ahead and did it on the average just to show you the immense amount of money that it would take for us to build the inventory increase. So if you have any questions about that, just let me know.
I have a question.
Sure.
So we just have to meet the total number of units. We couldn't say we're going to target like single family attached or something. We have to just meet that total amount that's set in at the bottom of the chart.
That's correct. The number that we received from the state was the 34,401. So we would have to build 1,032 units per year for the next 3 years. And we would have to find the gap financing to meet that total unit increase. And to clarify, those 1,000 per year would need to be deed restricted. So we don't have to provide gap financing for them. But most developers that are building affordable are looking for some type of gap financing. So we were just looking generally at what we've been providing on a per unit basis over the past few years. We've also had a lot of COVID money and different things we've added into increasing our pipeline, and those monies are going away. And so we're really going to be dependent on what comes through Prop 123. And so just as a comparable, Denver was looking at what the numbers were coming from the state, and it was about 10,000 units over 3 years. And they said that's what we've done in about the last 10 years. And so, I mean, everybody would have to really ramp up numbers, have to consider land, the time it takes for entitlements, getting deals financed, tax credit process, and things like that. And so those are the things highlighted to the state. And for, Aurora and other, more sophisticated communities, we have some of those deed restricted numbers on the front end. And so we were trying to really use that, and that's not the way that the legislation has been written. So our sort of recommendation is we sign on saying, yep, we'll create 1,000 units a year, and then go back to the legislature to really refine the definitions of what the unit counts are on the front end.
Okay, so obviously we don't have $142 million even with the Prop 123 money. But are there ways to kind of use the Prop 123 money to leverage other support so that we can put together kind of whatever funding package we do end up coming to, something that's going to look attractive to council from the perspective of like other entities are taking in a large portion of the funds, and then we're kind of adding our pieces. We're taking on, the loan.
You're breaking up again, Allison. Could you get closer?
Yes, sorry. I'm trying to talk like a normal person and not, yeah. So is there a way that we can put the funding together where council doesn't feel like we're eating the lion's share of the cost, where there is not just Prop 123, but other sources of funding that we can look at in putting together whatever the total amount is that we get to, even if it's not 142 bucks.
So we would still utilize all of the funding that we normally would for our community investment financing process or gap financing. The Prop 123 money that we are unlocking by committing would be leveraging that money as well. So in terms of additional money coming in, we are also working with the consultant to look at other ways of increasing dedicated funding for affordable housing, and that'll be coming to council in the next couple of months. There are no quick fixes, obviously, but at this point, there's not anything else and we aren't, we're just obligated to take any of the funding that is coming from Prop 123 and leverage it and distribute it the best way we can. I think to Sarah's point is if we're trying to get the maximum number of units, we're going to have to look at really, higher density projects to do that. And you're sort of disincentivizing some of the for sale affordable housing or some of the different types of products that we've been looking at and that our housing strategy really highlights and we know we need in Aurora. And so we're kind of getting like pigeonholed into just maximizing the number of units rather than really looking at the overall need, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? I don't know how accurate this was, but just seeing some articles around like Airbnb, potentially not being in a gray space, like just largely in some of the larger markets. And I thought I saw Colorado on there. Is that something that we can explore? Like if there's like a large, I don't know, shift in that part of the housing industry and properties become available in that regard.
So is the question that if properties are converted to Airbnbs, they would count towards this number?
No, that if
No.
people want to exit the Airbnb industry market, short-term rental rather is probably a better way to phrase that. And that we see a large occurrence of, properties entering or being sold, that were once, used for this project or that type of business. Is that something that we can, I don't know, obviously it's like individual people selling, but if it's going to happen, if it happens in mass, I wonder if that's something that we can look into, trying to capture some of those properties for our purposes.
We can definitely look into how to track that and the license piece. Yeah, I think when we work with groups like Elevation Land Trust, they're looking to get ahead of people selling homes on the, in the regular market to be able to sort of scoop them up and create that deed restriction for single family. But we can certainly work with the other groups in the city to look at what we have around short-term rentals currently.
Great. All right. right, doesn't look like there are any other questions or comments on this item. And this, do you need us to advance this, or is it gonna come anyways?
Councilmember Murillo, we would like to ask to move the information item forward to study session for an update with the final baseline number and the intent to opt in.
Okay, yeah, I support this. Councilmember Coombs,
Yes, I support.
Councilmember Marcano,
Yep, I also support, and I think staff, y'all probably already know that at least a couple of our Aurora reps are willing to work with y'all on potential revisions next year for session. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you.
all right. Any updates from community members? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Is there anyone on the phone that needs to or would like to speak? How would one unmute themselves if they're on the phone? I guess just. Anyone? How do folks on the phone unmute themselves?
So I went ahead and I sent them a request to unmute, so that
Okay.
should give them the ability if they would like to speak.
Sounds good. As long as they have that option for this section, that's good for me. All right, I'm not seeing or hearing anyone unmute, so that will conclude our meeting for today. Let's just double check on next month's meeting. We have that on the 27th. Is that correct?
Was the question when the next Horns meeting is?
Yeah, can you confirm that it's for the 27th?
So I actually have the next meeting on August 3rd.
Oh, yes, sorry. I have a separate one. My apologies.
No problem.
Okay, August 3rd, does that still work for our committee members?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, then we will plan on meeting next month then. And on that note, we are adjourned.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.